we doing that new lesson today?
Alright, so last class period, we started on the review for our liberal arts math EOY that is on Monday. We did problems 1 through 8. We skipped 9 and 10. And then 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. There's a video on Edmodo if you were absent. Today we're going to do 16, 17, 18, 19. And then I'm going to go back and cover the lesson that will enable you to answer 9 and 10. So we haven't learned that yet, but it's super important. So we'll do that lesson also once we finish these problems. Okay? So let's look at number 16. Says, which of the following best describes the classification of quadrilateral ABCD given the coordinates of A, B, C, and D? Okay, this one you should probably put some more effort in than I did. I kind of did a quick sketch of these ordered pairs because they are all points on the quadrilateral. Quadrilateral has how many sides? 4, right? So there's several 4-sided figures. A rhombus is 4-sided, a rectangle is 4-sided, a parallelogram, a square, they're all 4-sided, right?
Yeah.
So from geometry, you got to know some of this stuff. So I graph 315. Five comma 5. Three comma negative 5. And 1 comma 5. Is that a square?
No. Well,
Square has to have all 4 sides congruent. Is that a square? No. Parallelogram.
it's kind of like a wall.
A parallelogram has 4 equal sides. They're parallel and they're all equal. Well, wait, a rhombus, opposite sides are equal on a rhombus. So maybe a parallelogram's 4-sided plane with opposite sides parallel. That is definitely a parallelogram, but I'm thinking maybe a rhombus too. And it's parallelogram, 4-sided plane with opposite sides parallel. Let's go with parallelogram.
What if it's wrong?
I really need, rhombus is a parallelogram, which has opposite sides parallel, but all sides are equal. We would have to probably find the distances in those points to.
Yeah, we don't have time for that.
Yeah, and we don't. But to know, you need to find the distances. Maybe distance formula. Let me write that down for you in case you forget it. Distance is the square root of x sub 1 minus x sub 2 quantity squared plus y sub 1 minus y sub 2 quantity squared. So find the distance between all of these points and you can better answer this. Okay? Parallelogram is 4-sided with opposite sides parallel. And it doesn't say they have to be equal, it just says opposite sides are parallel. A rhombus is a parallelogram, so it's a 4-sided figure with opposite sides parallel.
We have Corey Rowe.
So a rhombus is also a parallelogram with opposite sides parallel. Wait, I'm sorry. A parallelogram with 4 equal sides. So like a square is a rhombus, but a square has to have 4 90-degree angles, right? A rhombus, kind of like I think about the diamond, like it's a square that's kind of tilt, you know? So if all 4 sides are equal, but they're not all 90-degree angles. So you you can figure that out, get you some, find the distances of those. But we're going to move on to 17. 17, what is the solution to the equation below? X squared equals 16. How can we solve for x? X already squared, so we will square root both sides. And remember, when we take the square root, we usually take the positive and negative square root unless we're trying to find the distance of something or the length of something. So x equals positive and negative, whoops, I wrote a 4 there. I meant to write a 16.
Imaginary.
Positive or negative 4. Is that imaginary?
Oh.
No, because the negative wasn't under the radical, right? So it would be answer choice what? C.
It's always C.
Now don't take the square root of 4 again, okay? Because we already took the square root of 16. The square root of 16 is 4, not the square root of 4. A lot of people do that. 18. If the function f of x equals x cubed minus 2x squared minus 15x was graphed on a coordinate plane, which of these represent all of the zeros of the function? Remember, zeros is the same thing as roots, is the same thing as solutions. It tells us where the graph would cross the x-axis. So when we're trying to find the roots, if they didn't give us the graph, we have to solve for x, okay? So I'm going to take the function and see what I can do with it. Can I use a quadratic formula to solve this?
That's 4, right?
Quadratic is when you have the highest degree. Is it 2? What's our highest degree? 3. And we don't have a cubic equation, right? Or a formula. So we can't do that. When we use factoring to solve, we do that with quadratics. It's not a quadratic. What do you notice about all 3 terms? They all have an x. So maybe if we take the GCF out, that might help us. So we have a GCF of x. Let's factor it out. Remember, when you factor it out, everything inside the parentheses you get because you divided every term by the GCF. So x cubed divided by x squared, and then a negative divided by positive is a negative. 2x squared divided by x would be 2x, and then negative 15x divided by x is negative 15. Now what we have inside parentheses is a quadratic, so maybe we can factor to solve. If we can't factor, we could use quadratic formula or completing the square. Okay, so I'm going to try to factor, and remember, I'm not factoring the original, I'm factoring now what's inside the parentheses. So a is 1, b is negative 2, and c is negative 15. And I need 2 numbers that multiply together to get a times c. So 1 times negative 15 is negative 15. And add together to get b, which is negative 2. 3 times 5, both positive? 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. 3 plus negative 5 is negative 2. Boom. So don't forget this x out here because that's going to give me a solution, so it's super important. So that x stays. I've got 2 sets of parentheses. One I'll put at x plus 3. One I'll put at x minus 5. And I want to know, instead of f of x, I'm just going to put a 0 there because I want to know when y is 0, what is x. So do I need, if I divide and slide, what would I be dividing and sliding by? 1, because a is 1. Is that necessary? No. Have I found the zeros? No. I have to set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. X is a factor. Set it equal to 0. Is that a solution? Yeah. If I were to factor out, if my GCF was 2 and I set 2 equal to 0, would that be a solution? Does 2 equal 0? No. But if that's a variable and I set it equal to 0, that tells me my graph's going to cross at 0. So that's one solution. And then I'm going to set x plus 3 equal to 0 and x minus 5 equal to 0. So remember, I'm solving for x. So I have three solutions: 0, -3, and +5. So that would be option D. Julio? Number 19, okay. Which expression is equivalent to x cubed plus 64? This is in factored form. If you notice, these are in factored form. Now, if this was a multiple choice and you could not remember how to factor, this is a difference of cube, a perfect cube plus a perfect cube. If you couldn't remember how to factor those, well, just multiply all these out and see which one matches, okay? But that's not what I want you to do. I want you to factor it the way you remember. Remember, when you have a perfect cube plus a perfect cube, you follow that little pattern, which is a plus b, because it's a sum, times a squared minus ab plus b squared. And that's for the sum of cubes. Just in case they give you a difference of cubes would be a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. That's a difference of cubes. But we are working with the sum of cubes. Perfect cube means you can take a number or variable or term, multiply it by itself 3 times. The result is a perfect cube. So a cubed, its cubed root is a, because a times a times a. What's the cubed root of 64? Do y'all remember? 4. Because 4 times 4 times 4 is 64, right? 4 times 4 is 16. 16 is a perfect square because you multiplied 4 2 times. 4 times 4 times 4 is perfect cube because you multiplied 4 3 times. Alright, so remember, to find a, that's going to be the cubed root of my first term, which is what? X. B is the cubed root of the second term, which we already said was 4. So we know in the first parentheses it's a plus b, so that'd be x plus 4, right? Even knowing that, we can already see what our answer is going to be, but we're going to keep going because you never know if they're going to ask you a multiple choice or fill in the blank or drag and drop or what. So now we'll do a square. So take whatever you had for a, square it. So that's x squared. So that's what I'll put in that first spot. You always subtract that middle term when it's a sum of cubes. And then a times b. So a is x times b is 4. What's x times 4 written appropriately? 4x. So that's what I'm going to put next. Minus 4x. Didn't mean to put that little slash mark through my 4. And then it says to add whatever b squared is. So b is 4. 4 squared is 16. So we thought it was going to be C. When I factored, knowing how to factor a sum of cubes, I got the same thing. So good to go. Got to remember what's perfect cube is. What's the sum of cubes, difference of squares, all that stuff. We have all that stuff in our spiral. How fun was that? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video, teach you the lesson that corresponds, which corresponds with those 2 that we skipped, and then we'll come back and answer the 2. If you're not here, I will attach that video to the Edmodo post as well. Make sure you watch it. Again, there's 19 questions on this review, which I'm assuming the test will be the same. And 2 of them cover this circle thing that I'm going to show in the video, so it's imperative that you watch it. Alright, so pausing, and I'll be back. Okay, so I just discovered that we have already taken the notes that will help us answer these two questions. I didn't think we had, so there will not be that video on Emoto. Well, it's already there from whenever we did it. But on page 137 and 138, the circles in general form, that's the notes that we need to help us answer questions 9 and 10. So, my bad. Alright, number 9. Consider the equation x squared plus y squared minus 2x plus 8y plus 13 equals 0. I know that is the equation of a circle because of the format that it's written in. There's an x square, there's a y square, there's a linear x and a linear y, okay? So that tells me that it's a circle. And it's in general form. So when a circle's in general form, I can't just look at it and figure out what the radius is and what the center of the circle is just by looking at it. That's center radius form, okay? So we can turn general form into center radius form by following the examples like we did on page 137 and 138 in our notes in our spiral, all right? So I'm going to rewrite my equation, x squared plus y squared minus 2x plus 8y plus 13 equals 0. And then if you go back and read the steps, it says, so first thing you want to do is move the constant to the other side. Sometimes it won't be written perfect like this. Sometimes maybe your x squared is on the right side, or your y squared is on the right side, or your constant, whatever. You want it to be in this order, but the only thing you want on the right side is the constant. So I'll move it on over. Now, when I rewrite this, because I'm going to want to group my x's together and my y's together, I'm just going to go ahead and write it like that. So I'll write my x squared minus 2x plus y squared, and I want to write it in standard form too, plus 8y, and then that went away, equals negative 13. So like sometimes it's grouped together pretty already, sometimes it's not. You want it grouped together pretty. Then it says, divide every term by the coefficient of the quadratic terms. It will always be the same coefficient for both terms. So if it's a circle, your coefficient of x squared is going to be exactly the same as your coefficient of y squared. If it's a 1, like in this case, if I divide by 1, is it going to change anything?
No.
No. But if it is any other number, then I have to divide by that number. Okay? In this case, I don't, so I can skip that. Yay, makes it a little easier. So now, and I could have done this in this step, but I'm going to take this, x squared minus 2x, put it in parentheses. I'm going to leave a space because I'm going to find a number to put here to make this a perfect square trinomial. Okay? Plus y squared plus 8y. And I'm going to leave a space for a number that I'm going to put there to make this a perfect square trinomial. And then set it equal to negative 13.
It is what we did on the notes.
Yeah, we did this in our notes. I was just thinking that we hadn't gotten to that point yet.
She said we didn't.
I know. Just didn't realize.
All
right. So, I got to figure out what that number is that I'm going to put in this set of parentheses to make this a perfect square, and in this set of parentheses to make this a perfect square, trinomial, okay? So that's called completing the square. We did a whole lesson on completing the square a long time ago. So what you do is, and so in my first set, whatever b is, a is 1, b is negative 2, we're trying to put a c here, okay? Whatever b is, divide it by 2, and then square it. So negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 1 quantity squared is positive 1, right? So when I add 1 to this trinomial, I just made a perfect square trinomial. But if I add 1 to the left side of the equal sign, I have to add 1 to the right side of the equal sign as well. Otherwise, I've changed the meaning of my problem. I made it unbalanced. You can't do that.
And then you have to do 8 over 8.
Right. So I'm going to do the same thing to this parentheses to make it a perfect square trinomial, but I use the b of this parentheses. So in this case, b is 8. So I do 8 divided by 2, quantity squared, which is 4 squared, which is 16. So I'll add 16 to the left side of the equation, but I want to put it with this parentheses because I'm making this parentheses a perfect square trinomial. And then I got to add it to the other side as well.
So 17 minus, well, negative 13 plus 17.
Okay, well, hold on. Let's look at the left side first. So if you forget how to do the shortcut, since I made a perfect square trinomial here and here, if you forget how to factor the shortcut, you can still do the factor. You can still do the little T-chart where find two numbers that multiply together to give you A times C and add together to get you B. That would be two numbers that multiply to get positive 1, add to get negative 2. What would it be? Negative 1 and negative 1, right?
Yeah.
So I do x minus 1 times x minus 1. Isn't that the same thing as x minus 1 quantity squared?
Yeah.
So if you know this is a perfect square trinomial, you can just make one set of parentheses, square it. The square root of the first term goes here. The square root of the last term goes here, and you use the sign of b. But again, if you don't remember, just do a T-chart. Plus, this is a perfect square trinomial too. Also, you need two numbers that multiply together to give you 16, add together to give you 8. What would that be? 4 and 4. So y plus 4 times y plus 4, or y plus 4 quantity squared. Shortcut, since it's a perfect square trinomial, make one set of parentheses, square it. The first term is the square root of the first term, so y. The last term is the square root of the last term, so 4. Use the sign of b. Equals negative 13 plus 1 is negative 12. Negative 12 plus 16 is 4. So this is an equation in circle radius form. Remember x minus h quantity square plus y minus k quantity square equals radius squared?
But don't you like have to change up the signs?
Yes, on the center, right? The center is at h comma k, but you got to change the signs of both. So it would be what? So 1 comma
Negative 4
negative 4.
equals 4.
And the radius is what?
4.
Not 4, 2. It's the square root of 4, because this is radius squared, so the radius would be the square root of 4, which is 2. So, notice they're all 1 comma negative 4. So if we would have, I didn't even notice that to begin with. If we would have noticed that from the beginning, every single center was at 1 comma negative 4, we would have just had to figure out what the radius is. Still, you'd have to really go through the whole process, though, to figure out that this is going to be a 4 over here. And obviously, you're going to see a 4, but you got to be smarter than the average bear to know that you have to take the square root of 4. So it is b.
On 10, you should do like B as in
B as in boy. B as in banana.
on 10 is really, you should
B as in bear. B as in Barto.
On 10 you should do like what you do on like imagination. Pause the video now.
Everybody cool with 9?
Oh, I'll give people
the video on.
Make sure when you write this, you put your x minus or plus whatever first, and your y, because when you pick h comma k, if you have this parentheses over here and this parentheses over here, you're going to get mixed up. It's always x minus the number or plus the number and then y. If you mix them up, just make sure you get your h always goes with the x, your k always goes with the y. Okay? H. All right, number 10. Número 10. proceed.
Pause now.
What is the diameter of the circle represented by x squared minus 6x plus y squared plus 8y equals 0? We can tell that's a circle in the form that it's written. You got an x squared and a y squared. An x and a y, right?
Yeah.
So, first thing you do is you move the constant to the other side.
So we have to find the radius.
Do we have a constant? Our only constant would be 0, right? That's our only number that doesn't have a variable.
Was this question purposely the same as our other example?
Yes. I did get it from this, yes. The next thing we have to do is look at the coefficient of your quadratic terms. So that's your x squared and the y squared. Divide every term by the coefficient. What would we be dividing by in this case? 1. Is that necessary? No, it's not. If it was any number other than 1, then I would need to do that before I did anything else. But since it's not, I can go on to the next step. Now look, they already have their x's grouped together and their y's grouped together, don't they? So I'm just going to rewrite it with parentheses and then leave myself a little space for the constant that I'm going to add when I complete the square. So I'll have x squared minus 6x, leave a space, plus, thank you, y squared plus 8y, leave a space, equals 0. Now I've got to figure out what numbers I'm going to use to complete the square, make them perfect square trinomials. When you're told to complete the square, that means take your b, divide it by 2, and square it, and that will complete this to make it a perfect square trinomial, okay? So on the first one, I'm just going to write this so you'll have it in your notes, b squared divided by 2. b would be negative 6 divided by 2, quantity squared. So that's negative 3, quantity squared, which is what? 9. It's positive because the negative times the negative is positive. When you're making a perfect square trinomial, that constant is always positive. If you put a minus on there, you do not make a perfect square trinomial. So don't forget to also add it to the other side of the equation. Right on. Now I'm going to complete the square of my second set of parentheses where b is 8. So 8 divided by 2, quantity squared, gives me 4 divided by 2, or I'm sorry, gives me 4 squared, which is 16. So I'll add 16 here and add 16 over here. Forgetting to add it to the other side is the most common error. So now I'm going to factor these perfect square trinomials. What's x squared minus 6x plus 9 factored?
3.
X minus 3, quantity squared. Square root of the first, square root of the last, sign of your b term. Plus, it's always plus. What is, we made a perfect square trinomial over here. What is it factored?
Y plus 4.
Y plus 4,
Quantity squared.
quantity squared, equals 25. So it didn't ask us for the center, but now that it's in center radius form, let's just say what the center is.
3.
3 comma,
Negative 4.
okay. And what is the radius? 5. What's the answer to the question?
8. No wait, the diameter is what thing? So Z. Z is B because it's 10.
What is it? B.
Because you're going
B.
plus 9.
Guys, we found that the radius is 5, right? Isn't diameter all the way through? So it's just doubled, not squared. So your diameter is 10 because you just 5 plus 5, not 5 squared. Just doubled, so 10. Yes, and that one was identical to the one in the notes. Even if it is stupido, if you see that on the test, it's not a partial credit. You got to make sure you are answering what it's asked. Right on?
I really did though. I said it was B the whole time.
No.
Is everybody cool with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
This one's saying.
So I'm going to end the video, and then we're going to do some practice. If you're not here, be ready to take this test on Monday, the 15th. I don't know, probably regular class time. Be listening to announcements.